Welcome back to the CMMC Compliance Guide podcast. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Austin Justice.
And I'm Brooke Justice.
This week we're going over the 32 CFR Rule. We covered the 48 CFR Rule last week, and we wanted to hit this one a little more in depth. Brooke, I've got some questions for you. You ready?
Shoot, let's go.
Let's do it. Can you walk us through the most critical changes in the proposed 32 CFR Rule and how they directly impact DoD subcontractors?
I can, and really the first thing I want to point to is that depending on who you talk to, you might get different versions of what's critical, what's important in the 32 CFR Rule. So, of course, we're coming at this from a provider, implementer, and what our customers see. So what affects them, and what matters to them. So that's kind of how we're coming at it. So really, POAMs. There's a change on the POAMs. FIPS encryption. There's FIPS validated encryption. There's not a change there, but they doubled down on it. So 800-172 revision 2 is an important one. ESPs, the all-important external service providers. That's another important one. And then of course we talked about this last time. Certification cost. So those are really the key things that we kind of want to delve into and that affect our clients and us.
Okay. You mentioned POAMs. What exactly are POAMs? How do the new limitations on the POAM timelines themselves affect subcontractors seeking CMMC certification?
So what they did do, so before, if you had a POAM and it said, technically if it said, I have this one control, we haven't got it yet, we haven't implemented it yet, but we're going to implement it by November 1st of 2028 or 2038. Technically that'd be fine. Might be hard to talk somebody into that, but technically it'd be fine. Well, now they've actually put an actual limitation on that. It's 180 days or about 6 months. So where that really comes into play is during the certification assessment. So if you're preparing for your to go get your assessment, it doesn't necessarily matter a whole lot. You want to be ready in time, but for the POAM, once you get your go for your assessment, if you have a POAM item that comes out of that you have to get completed, it has to be done in 180 days. The other thing where it will probably come into play is if you have any significant changes in your business network, for instance, or some other significant change, a company merger, something like that. That will technically that'll be a POAM item that you need to address during that time frame, and I would imagine that 180 days would come into play there. So really what that means in those instances, you just need to prepare and be ready for that. You've got to prepare for mergers. You've got to prepare for network changes, significant changes. So it's just one of those things you have to prepare for. But 180 days is the limit now for POAM items. And a POAM, I didn't explain that, so I apologize to our viewers. Some of you probably already know what it is, but it's a plan of action and milestones. And really, that's a list of to-do items. So we have, for instance, 108 out of the 110 controls complete, but these last two we still have yet to do. And your POAM should say, for these controls, this is what we plan on doing. This is the date when we plan on getting those done. That's what a POAM is.
Okay. We love our jargon, don't we?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's more than a 3-letter acronym, but still, it's an acronym. So.
Right. So one of the hot topics is FIPS encryption, FIPS validated encryption.
Yes.
And I was just talking to a buddy that a very large company, a software developer, and he's having to deal with it himself. And he was complaining about it as well.
I'm sure.
So we're seeing it big to small. So I just want to address that a little bit. It's a mandatory requirement under the new rule. Can you explain why FIPS validation is so important and what the challenges subcontractors might face when implementing it?
Sure. So the key word to understanding this is it's got to be FIPS validated encryption, not compliant, not equal to, not similar to, not anything. It's FIPS validated encryption. So, in other words, that is a company going through and saying, here is our encryption modules. These are how they work. And the government has to go through and look at them, verify them, validate them, I guess. So bless them, and get them out there and approve them. The problem is that takes a really long time to do, and not all companies want to bother with that. So the FIPS encryption, FIPS validated encryption, is a bit of a big deal. To kind of give a couple of examples. So Windows Server 2019, 2016, they're both FIPS validated. They're on the list, so they're good. Windows Server 2022, it's not. This is 2024, folks. It's been out for 2 years. It's not FIPS validated yet. It's in the works, but it's not there yet. So the other thing is, with that example, is that there are no currently supported versions of Windows 11 or Windows 10 that are FIPS validated. There are older versions that, because of their update cycle these days, with the feature updates and all that, there are some older versions that are not supported that are FIPS validated, but we're still waiting on the FIPS validated for those. Similar to firewalls, everything else, they have to be in the CMVP database. CVMP. I might have that wrong, but
we'll look it up later.
It's not in front of me, so I apologize about that. I should have that acronym right. But anyway, if it's not in that database and approved, then it's not FIPS validated. So for instance, some firewalls implement that encryption I believe via a hardware module. So that model of firewall is going to be okay. Some do it by a version of firmware. So you got to know what exactly is FIPS validated, and you have to be able to grab that module from the database in your documentation and prove that this firewall, this version of Windows, whatever it is FIPS validated, and here's the documentation.
Yeah, so this seems like it's going to be, I hesitate to use the word headache because I understand CMMC is a very needed thing, and we're doing it for obvious reasons. But it does seem like it's going to cause quite a bit of the headache for implementing it, in terms of we're not even used to we're IT guys first, right? So we're used to just making sure a customer's on the latest and greatest Windows version or server version and getting it out there and making sure they're on the best equipment. But now you're telling everyone that we have to be careful about that because it may not be FIPS validated, and so we may have to hold back a little bit on some of those either firewall products or Windows versions. Or is that right?
You do, but the other thing is with these assessments, and we'll see. We know how they've handled this because there's proof in the DIBCAC assessments they're doing right now, and so we know how they're handling those, and we have to see how it plays out in the actual certification assessments when they come out. What they don't want to do is say, yeah, you have to stay on an unsupported version of Windows that's got all sorts of holes and bugs in it. It's no longer being patched with security patches. Right. You've got to stay on that because it's FIPS validated encryption. They're not going to go that route. But there's got to be some leeway there, and of course, we're waiting for the 32 CFR final rule to come out. That final rule has not come out yet. But we'll see where this goes. Mm-hmm. They did double down on that in this proposed rule. So we'll see where the FIPS validated encryption ends up. Really, it'd be hard. I understand why they don't want to do it, but I would like to see it FIPS compliant encryption or mm-hmm. FIPS, something like that. Because really, I mean, there's tons of great encryption algorithms out there that perform well, right. And everything, and are very secure, but just have not the modules have not been approved by the government yet. So,
right.
So it's a bit of a headache, and I don't know if it's necessarily a catch-22, but mm-hmm. It's a bit of a headache to deal with.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is we just don't know, and we're gonna have to wait for guidance and for someone to set the standard. going forward. Is that right? I mean,
that is right, and we have to wait for that final rule to come out, see what that says, and then all we can do is prepare then,
right.
And then we have to see how those first assessments come out, how they shake out with things like, if there's no versions of Windows 10 that are currently supported that are FIPS validated, what do we do?
Yeah.
I think I know. I think we'd rather lean towards keeping everything up to date and patched because that's a lot more important than FIPS validated encryption. So
keeping it secure. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe going forward on projects or decision making, kind of put security first with knowing that the compliance might change it later, and don't let yourself get caught too far behind on things.
And I think part of this is going to be you have to be what they have shown in the DIBCAC assessments is that if you were, for instance, did have your FIPS validated encryption in place and then you had to upgrade or whatever the case may be and you're no longer, then you can prove, hey, I was there. And as soon as we're able to be there again, we'll be there.
Okay.
So
that's what I was wondering.
That's a lot different. So having the right equipment in place. So another firewall, we had it turned on. This, the FIPS encryption is not available with this version of firmware. As soon as it comes out, we'll put it back on there. We'll turn it back on or something like that. So those are the kind of exceptions they're making right now. As I understand it, those are the kind of exceptions they're making right now. But you have to be in the position to be able to flip that switch and turn it on. Right. You can't just have all sorts of consumer grade equipment around and say, whenever it's available, we'll get it. It doesn't work like that. So
right, it has to be very provable that you're doing the right thing.
Absolutely,
and you're still at the end of the day need the exception from them. So
absolutely,
yeah, okay, that makes sense. I appreciate you going over that. That might be a selfish question for me, but I've always been wondering about the FIPS encryption, how they're going to handle it. So, all right, moving on. What are the implications of NIST 800-171 Rev 2 being hard-coded into the new rule? Should subcontractors expect further changes as Rev 3 is already out, or what do you think is going to happen there?
I think they really kind of did everybody a favor while introducing some problems, but they did everybody a favor by saying, look, I know that they're marching forward with NIST 800 and they're, revision 1, revision 2, now they're on revision 3 and so on and so forth. But while we're getting this revision 2 implemented and CMMC implemented, I think they kind of did everybody a favor by saying, you know what, instead of, because there's some a good deal of changes in Rev 3 for NIST 800-171. We're going to stick with 800-171 Rev 2, and we're going to hard code that in the CMMC rule. So it's for the foreseeable future until they release another proposed rule down the road. CMMC is based on Rev 2, which is good. We don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, here's Rev 3, and we got to do all these changes. And we're still trying to roll this program out, So probably what they'll do in the future, once this program gets rolled out, is say, okay, now we're gonna release a rule to change that to keep up with the current version, and that's a guess, of course. I have no clue what they're going to do, but for now, it's hard coded to Rev 2, and we'll be sticking with Rev 2 for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
I would imagine for quite a few years.
Yeah. What that sounds like to me is that we're always should expect changes going forward forever, because the cat's out of the bag with technology. It's always changing, and at the end of the day, it's essentially an arms race, right? I mean, new technology brings new security risk, brings new compliance, and this is going to be a part of our life going forward. And there's no just getting CMMC fixed and, let's move on to the next thing. We're going to have to, this is going to be a part of our jobs forever.
It is. And, cyber, as you said, cybersecurity is ever changing, and it changes fast. It changes, the whole tech world changes really fast. So, trying to keep up, NIST 800-171, and mind you, that's not the government. That's not the DoD
right.
doing the changes for NIST 800-171. So, they're trying to keep up with the times, trying to keep it relevant, and trying not to fall behind. That's all perfectly understandable. But of course, while a whole DIB industry, the Defense Industrial Base, is trying to ramp up on CMMC, it's probably not a good idea to change the rules of the game in the middle of it or at the beginning of it, really. So,
yeah. So after you spend a little while and like the CFR and DFARs and CMMC and NIST, you realize that these are all like nested rules and frameworks and governance, and that they all kind of reference this like web of things. And NIST is they're basically using the NIST 800-171 framework as like cybersecurity best practices, and so they're just referencing it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that more? I mean, I know I'm kind of summing it up, but
that's
skipping a lot.
That's pretty close.
Yeah.
NIST is National Institutes for Standards and Technology. They release standards for all sorts of technology at all the time. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. So, and they do a great job at that. Mm-hmm. And at these conferences we go to for CMMC and other things, they will let you know we're not the DoD, and the DoD will let you know we are not. We are not NIST. So, but yes, they do rely on those standards because they are good standards. They do rely on those. NIST 800-171 is a subset or references back, however you want to phrase it, to NIST 853, which is for federal government networks. So this is basically for contractors that do work for the federal government. That's why they came up with it, and that's what it's meant for. Anyway, they all play part in each other. You mentioned DFAR's rules. The DFAR's rules is what puts those into effect, and references, pulls CMMC, defines CMMC, marries the NIST 800 standard to it. So that's how it all kind of gets married. And you're right, it is kind of a jumble.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're new to the game or, you're not familiar with it, it's very imposing when you first look at it. And none of it, it doesn't seem to make sense to start with,
No, it's still hard to make sense of it.
Yeah, it's true. That's very true. Yeah. Yes. But it does make sense. I promise that. Just spend enough time and you'll find it figured out. I still find myself learning some things sometimes. So
right.
All right. So this is another big topic. And, I'm not sure how many people are talking about this. I'm very concerned about it. So I'm going to ask you this again selfishly and for our viewers. So we've kind of created a chicken and egg problem, around ESPs. So I guess I'll just use my notes to make this make sense. What role do ESPs, external service providers, play in CMMC compliance? How does this chicken egg scenario impact subcontractors working with these providers? Specifically, the ESPs have to be certified for the contractor to get certified, but they're certifying the contractors first. And so, what's going to happen here?
Sure. Yeah. So, first of all, an ESP is an external service provider. So, an external service provider is anyone that is a third party that helps a contractor, basically, to the federal government, that helps them in their business network. So it helps process, store, or transmit, or protect CUI. So that's what an external service provider is. So we as an MSP, as an IT provider, MSP, there's another acronym for you. It's a managed services provider. That's an industry term that probably nobody outside the industry knows at all, but that's what we call ourselves. So IT providers like us are an ESP, and we always understood that we were going to be an ESP or an external service provider, and that we would probably have to go through this certification for CMMC. And we've from the get-go, some people don't realize this term, and I thought it was just kind of known, but we I always say we eat our own dog food, which means
I've said that a couple times,
yes.
And people just look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah, they're like, "What do you mean?" So I have to explain it. So, in other words, everything that we tell our clients that they have to be that they have to have in place. We have those in place too, and we have more as well. But because that helps me sleep well at night, and I'm sure it helps you sleep well at night. Yep. So we eat our own dog food. We have all these policies in place. So we always knew from the get-go that we were going to have to be CMMC compliant. However that ended up looking, we knew that we were going to have to do that.
Or however it ends up, because we're still a little unsure.
So we always expected that. But what with this new rule, what it basically also says is that we buy services from other providers as well. So, for instance, we have a service that we use for SIM and SOC. SIM is a security information and event monitor or management, and then a SOC is a security operations center. So whenever you put those together, basically what you're doing is gathering all the logs from all your devices or all your key devices, however you want to do it. But we do all devices, all laptops, desktops, servers, firewalls, the cloud. We do all those, gather them, save those logs, upload those logs to the cloud, and then algorithms and some AI that go through those, look for correlations, all that kind of fun stuff, look for bad things happening, and they pop some alerts. There's a certified security engineers that look through that take care of looking through it, and I can go on. I can tell a whole story about that, but that's probably another podcast. So or another one of these things. So. But there's actual real certified people that have eyes on and go through those and look at those alerts. They weed those alerts out and they try to make sense of some of them, and then they let us know, hey, you need to look at this. Some of them just pop and are that important, and they say, hey, you gotta look at this, or we're locking this machine down for you, and you need to go look. You need to go address it. So that's what that whole service is, and we don't have the staff to do all that 24/7, 365, or else our just like any of the other contractors, subcontract some things, it would be a lot more expensive for them to do that in-house. The same thing for us.
If you're a machinist, machine shop, you could go buy a foundry and smelt your own metal. It's easier to buy a block of it.
Right. So same sort of thing. But nevertheless, for instance, that SIM and SOC service, the one that we get, that is now, because they're classified as a security protection asset, because they get log data and all sorts of other data that helps you secure CUI and FCI. That's a security protection asset, and now they have to be CMMC Level 2 certified. And so what that means is that, and there's a rule that says CMMC basically lets you know, states that you have to have the organizations seeking certification, so OSCs that use third-party providers, those ESPs, have to be certified before they can even seek certification. Mm-hmm. So now the OSC is seeking certification. Now we got to be certified before them, and not only that, guess what? Our provider for SIM and SOC now has to be certified before we can get certified, because now we're an organization seeking certification. Mm-hmm. So now you've created a chain effect, right. And that is a chicken and egg you're talking about. So how in the world are they going to handle this? And that's a big problem, huge problem, and stands to be a gigantic problem. How are they going to address this? Well, hopefully they left themselves a little bit of a door and a little bit of a way to address it in the proposed rule. So we'll see if there's. Door? I'll have to go back. I don't remember the specifics. Mm-hmm. I knew you were going to ask me that.
I can't believe you don't have everything memorized. What's wrong with you?
It has. I'll have to go back and read it before
we'll cover it on another.
We will. That's another podcast.
Yeah.
So
the point is, the impact is large, and
the impact
it affects
is wide
everyone.
and deep, and so they'll have to address that. And I'm pretty sure that they will see that they have to address that. So we'll have to see what they say during when the final rule comes out. Mm-hmm. But they did leave themselves a little bit of an opening as well to be able to address that. So we'll see where that comes out, where it shakes out.
That sounds great. Thank you for that. Be a little more in the weeds with these. All customers are like, okay, this all sounds great, but let's get to brass tacks, right? With certification assessments expected to cost a minimum of $30,000, how do you respond to concerns that these costs may be disproportionately affecting smaller subcontractors?
How do I respond to that? Well, they're other than they're right.
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard from some of our clients. We've got some clients that are really small, like less than 10 people, some that are 20, 30, and some that are larger than that. And so some of them just realize. I guess all of them realize, but some of them are. The bigger you are, the easier it is to handle it, right?
Right.
But the problem,
You have the resources.
You have the more resources to be able to handle that. Exactly. So they're after talking to multiple assessors and going through some classes to be certified, and we hit on this during the last podcast too. So anyway, after going through those classes and getting certified, I realized how many hours go into this. And an assessor has before you can even sign an agreement with an assessor, and they can send you a bill, they've got roughly 40 hours in it. And that's not 40 hours of somebody that makes minimum wage.
Yeah. That
is 40 hours of a pretty expensive person, So they've got some time and money investment in it, and that's before they even get started. And I just say that to let you know that the assessors are not gouging people, and they're not.
There's more to it than it seems.
There may be some. I'm not going to say there's none, but the assessors in general are not gouging people and are not. They're good folks. I've talked to a lot of them. They're good folks. So, but there's a big time investment there, and a big time investment for people that are highly qualified, and with how they limit these assessments. These assessor certifications, they are limiting the pool of those, and rightly so. But they're limiting the pool of those assessors to not be available to just any Joe, right? And so that pool is kind of small, very talented, and there's a lot of very talented people there. So
not only there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more hours and work that is involved. You also have the market effect that the number of available people to do the job increases the price as well.
Yes,
or
it
could.
It could.
Yeah.
And so all that really just to say that it's expensive to start with because of all those factors, right. And you've got a low bar, or you've got a high minimum bar, I guess I should say, but that low bar is kind of high, or that entry bar is kind of high. Because of that, you've got all this set work that you have to do up front, and so those certifications are going to cost a minimum of $25,000 or $30,000, no matter how big you are.
Yeah.
You can be 5 people, you can be 2 people, and it's probably going to be $25,000-$30,000, and that's just the certification assessment. You go look at the number of hours that they say that should be spent on this thing, and they come up with an estimate of $107,000 for small entities, and that's once every 3 years. So I guess you could argue it's $30 whatever $1,000 per year, but that's still a lot for a 2 to 5 person company or 10, 15, 20 person company to afford.
We weren't paying it before.
Yeah, so that is understandable, and that's understandable that they're worried about that. It's possible that there may be some. I always hear about grants. I always hear about help with this. The stuff that I've seen available is through nonprofits or something that maybe, they basically explain it all to you and say, here's how it is, here's how it works, and this is what it really means. Here you go implement it.
Yeah.
So that's nice, but a 5-person company doesn't have time to implement all of the controls for and all the objectives for CMMC.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, and I mean it's just. I'm going to go back to it. It's the real burden is implementation. I mean, the assessments cost money, everything else, but the real burden of this is implementation. And and you can't be compliant, get certified if you don't have all the security tools, all the proof, all the the person, if you have, IT or security people on staff to do the job, or paying for, a provider to do it for you. Like that is the burden of it. So,
yeah, and the people who have gone through and checked a bunch of boxes and put it in place, CMMC in place and maybe kind of fudged it a little bit, and not spent much money on it and said, yeah, we're compliant. Now they're going to have a certification that they have to go through, and now they're realizing that, oh, gosh, this is going to cost a lot more money, and why is it going to cost us? Well, it's going to cost that much because you actually have to put the right solutions in place, and they actually have to be managed, and there actually has to be a lot of documentation. In fact, there's a lot more documentation for this thing than I even realized. As we went, we've got all sorts of things documented, but the level of documentation they want on everything. I mean, we have to, for instance, the FIS validation. We have to look for our vendors. We have to get the certification documents. That proper word escapes me, so I apologize. But have to get the certification documents from the website and document those, so you can say, yes, this module is FIPS validated, and here's the proof. And so we have to have all that on file, and that's just one part. I mean, so that's just an example of proof and documentation that you have to have. There's a lot.
Yeah, and you're really just not doing yourself a favor if you're going through that ExoStar SPRS assessment and saying you're 110 and you're not, or you're checking those boxes, because all you're doing is creating that CMMC debt for later, and your contracts, the amount of money they're paying you, are not going to compensate you correctly for what you haven't done. And so, that's just true for everything. I mean, the more that you don't do correctly in the right way, the more you're hurting yourself later. And so it's really just best to bite the bullet and address it. So, because this is going to cause you problems later. So
absolutely.
And if you get found out and there's some other consequences of that, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
So I wouldn't want those consequences personally. So.
Yeah, that's the False Claims Act. That's,
yes.
They have. They've made an example of a few people. It's been in the news, and that the False Claims Act is another one of those things that I didn't list out in the things that are. It's not changed, but anyway, that's something that every time you hear, at every conference and everything, you always hear about the False Claims Act, how important it is, and how you can face some severe consequences. And I know I don't want to face those consequences, but I consider it one of those things that's understandable, and that's just a given.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's a big deal, and there's a lot of people that make a lot bigger deal out of it, as it should be. But it's not a change. It's nothing new. It's perfectly understandable.
It's not anything I would want to intentionally go against.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not going to roll the dice either.
Yeah. No matter if you think this is unfair to small businesses, I wouldn't want to risk.
Right.
I would just pay the money and not risk it for myself. But you're able to make your own decisions. So anyway, we got off on a tangent there.
We did,
but we can get back. So all right. So we already talked about FIPS already, so we can skip this one, but I'll let you decide. Given the strict requirements for FIPS validated encryption and the slow process of that validation, how do you suggest subcontractors stay compliant while waiting for updates to the validation process? I think you mentioned that earlier. You can just
Yeah, next.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Guys,
We'll make sure there's nothing else there.
No, there's really not.
Okay.
I mean, we already covered it,
Okay.
and it's a tough deal. So you really need to have that FIPS validated encryption in place, and those places that you don't, like Windows 10 and 11, for instance, you have to have the ability to turn that right back on whenever it is FIPS validated. So.
Okay. Very cool. All right, moving along. Just rewind if you want to know the answer to that question. All right. What do you think the biggest obstacle for contractors will be once the proposed rule is finalized? Are there any steps that they can take now to get ahead of these challenges?
Well, it's always good to prepare, and it's always good to make sure you read up and understand all the rules, all the controls, all the objectives. But as far as the final rule goes, the things that I listed off are important to know about. The POAMs being limited to 180 days, the FIPS encryption that we've beaten till we can't beat it anymore. The ESPs and the certification cost. I mean, those are really you address all those and make you're good as far as the changes go. But really, the biggest thing I would say is be prepared and don't get caught behind. because there's just a lot to do, and for somebody to come along and say, okay, and really this is going to be required when this is put in place. It's going to be on new contracts. So now one of our clients brought up the other day, well, we don't have contracts really, but we do work under this other program. I don't remember what it was called, but it's a program where they are able to bid on work, and it's not really a contract. They just get a PO. Mm-hmm. And so I asked them, well, is there a DFARS rule on that PO anywhere? And they'll have to go back and look at it. So I just found out just recently. So there may be a DFARS rule listed, buried somewhere on the PO. I wouldn't doubt that a bit. But as far as they knew, they don't have any contracts really that they could tell me about. So it may be a little bit different for them. Lockheed may come up and say, hey, on this date, these POs from here on out, you have to meet CMMC level 2. You have to be CMMC level 2 certified. So there may be some difference there. But as far as the whole rule goes and everything that we're talking about, everything has to do, and everything the government talks about, everything has to do with contracts. Mm-hmm. So when it goes into effect, it'll be on new contracts. That's what it'll be on.
I guess it's a good point to make, I think, on work you're bidding, double check that if you're not compliant, that it's not nested or somewhere deep in the fine print, so you're not exposing yourself to quite a significant amount of money you have to spend for that PO. Or
yes,
yeah,
and we can tell you all day long that, hey, look at your contract. There's a DFARS rule on there. It's DFARS 252-204, 7012, 7019, 7020, 21. It's something's going to be on there, right? But it's another thing to actually go looking for that. And then where's that? I couldn't tell you. Our clients probably could, but we tell them, look on your contracts, and there's probably going to be 7012 on there and maybe some others. So, and I know that I've seen I haven't seen those contracts, but I've seen emails and other things come through that they show us that say, can you help me with this? In essence, or in short, I know I've talked at length about this already, but so this is about new contracts whenever it finally goes into effect. And so my suggestion really is that you don't wait, because there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of things to get done. Even when you think you have everything done, you're going to go to get certified, and they're going to say, oh, hey, what about this here and this here? And you're like, well, we didn't think that needed to be. We thought that was out of scope, and they say, well, I don't think so because of this, whatever it may be. That may not be the conversation, but there very well may be some things that you have to work on last minute. And so you don't want to leave, have 30 days. We've got to get this contract, because this contract will replace some other ones that we're losing at the end of, in 2 months. And so we have to have this new contract, and we've got to be certified before we have this contract. You don't want to be in a position of rushing to get everything done and not being able to.
Yeah, and if you've got, under CMMC 2.0, and these new rules are a whole nother beast, but a lot of the contracts and POs out there to this day already require most of this stuff by way of NIST 800-171, right?
Through DFARS rules that implement that, yes.
So even if you haven't heard and gotten that email, your buyer calling you, probably going to look and see if it is a requirement of any existing contracts you have, because like you said, I wouldn't want to get caught down the line going, oh man, I got to do all this ASAP, and it's hard to find an assessor, get certified, and if I don't do this, my revenue dries up in X amount of days. It seems like a stressful day to me, and I try to avoid stressful days.
It's very stressful, yes, absolutely.
So heads up there. All right, cool. So moving on, there's been some concern that the tight deadlines for POAMs could lead to certification lapses. How can contractors avoid falling into that trap, and what options do they have if they face delays?
POAMs are limited to 180 days now, assuming that doesn't change in the final rule, but I don't think it will. Mm-hmm. I don't expect that one to change, because that just, you got to have some sort of time limit on it, or else people will take advantage of it, right? There's 180 days for the POAMs, and really to be certified, you cannot have an open POAM item. So if you're waiting on certification to get a contract or something of that nature, whatever you're waiting on it for, you're waiting on certification and going through that process, and now you have an open POAM item that says you need to implement FIPS validated encryption for X, Y, or Z, right, or whatever it may be. You have 180 days now to get that done. If you don't get it done, then...
All right, sorry about that, guys. We had some technical difficulties with our equipment. We just bought new stuff, so we're learning it. So,
Hey, aren't we a technology company? I'm just wondering.
I was about to say, leave it to the IT company to have a technology screw up right in the middle of a podcast, right?
Of course, we are an IT company, not an audio visual company. So,
Yeah.
you know.
They are very different. I don't know how to work any of this. All right. So we were talking about the POAMs. I don't know if you remember where you were at in the time lapses and how to address that.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where I was at, but about the concerns of the tight deadlines for POAMs. So really, that all goes back to, I mean, the rule defines the timelines for how long you can have an open POAM item. That's 180 days, about 6 months. Completely understandable. You don't really, where it matters is getting your certification. Okay, because you cannot get certified with an open POAM item. You can go through certification with an open POAM item, but until you get that done, then once that's done, they have to follow up with you, verify that that's done, and then they can issue or you can be certified after that. So that's understandable. They don't want to wait forever. You know, there's got to be a point. You know, so 6 months is a good point. So how do you attack that? How do you avoid falling into a trap or a delay? Well, it's to do everything you can before that. Just a minute, I talked about preparation a minute ago, and it's all about preparation. You got to prepare. You got to make sure that you've done everything, crossed all your T's, dotted all of your I's. I's have to be dotted. You've got to make sure you've got everything done before you go for that certification. So, that's really where the POAMs matter. If you're just working on getting certified, you know, it doesn't matter really, because you're working towards getting certified. But once you have that C3PAO come in, that's the point at which you really need to get that done. So, but preparation is a key. Hiring somebody to come in for the certification to do either a mock assessment or maybe just to do some hiring a certified assessor to come in and do a mock assessment or just consulting to look over everything to make sure you're ready for assessment. That's always a good idea. That's part of preparation. Yes, it does cost more money. As we get started down this journey, you know, for the very first time, it's not necessarily a bad idea to make sure you have everything ready. So that's always a great idea. But you have to have that. You have to have all your POAM items completed to be able to get certified. So this certification isn't like some of the other things where you say, you know, hey, yes, I'm working on this and this is what I plan to do. And the auditor comes back, you know, next year and he says, hey, have you made progress on this? Yeah, I'm making progress. It's not like that. You have to be 100% or nothing. It's
Pass or fail.
Pass or fail. Yeah. 100 or a 0. So.
Yep. And it's not pass or fail at 70 like it used to be back in like college or something, right? It's 100.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So if we were right in the middle of just the most enthralling information that we didn't get to for you, comment below. We'll try to get an answer. Text us. You can find it on our website or email us at cmmc@justicitc.com, and we'll get an answer to you. Sorry about that. All right, moving on. I want to bring this back home, or bring this home and you know, ask, you know, how our audience can use this information to make an impact in their business. So the first one is for those in our audience that are more on the beginning side than later stages of their CMMC journey. What are the first 3 steps you'd recommend they take to ensure they're on the right path?
Just beginning their compliance journey.
Yeah.
So I would say, really hire somebody that knows what they're doing. Somebody that has. You can go to the Cyber AB is the board that oversees all this. You can go to the cyberab.org and you can look at the marketplace and you can find people that are registered practitioners. You can find people that are certified assessors. Hire somebody that can come in and help you make heads or tails because there are 110 controls, but within those 110 controls, there are 320 objectives you have to meet. So what exactly does this mean? You know, what exactly are we supposed to implement? You can struggle through all that. You can read all the documentation you want to, but really a little help goes a long way. A little knowledgeable help goes a long way. So to help that. the second thing is, again, I would say don't wait, prepare now, start working on it. And the other thing I'd tell you is that you can't do this in your spare time. This is not a spare time thing. If you try to do this in your spare time, you're going to be working on it forever, and you're never going to be certified. Can't tell you the number of people that number of companies that we've helped out that they said, we need a little help, or we helped them with a gaps assessment, for instance. Help them with a gaps assessment, and then they struggle on their own, and then they come back and say, "Hey, can you help us implement this?" Not waiting, getting the job done, getting started, and hiring somebody to come in and help you make heads or tails of it is really important.
Absolutely. Okay. So, what's one misconception about CMMC compliance that you encounter most frequently, I should say, and how do you correct it?
Really, for new people coming in and us talking to new people, it's that they don't really realize what all is involved. So that they and I just mentioned one of these things, but it's that you can do it. You can assign it to a low-level Fred over here, and he can work on it in his spare time and get you certified. That's not how it works. CMMC is a business decision. It is a business process. It's something. It works on all your business processes. It's not an IT thing. It's not. It is partly IT and technology, but in large part, it's your business processes that it addresses. Your policies. How you do everything. That's what it addresses. So you have to have high-level stakeholder involvement. You have to have knowledgeable people that know what they're doing and have the time to do it. So it's not something you can do in your spare time, or it's not something that low-level – I hate to pick on people with the name Fred, but maybe low-level Brooke. I don't really know. But so if, you can't just assign it to somebody who you think can do it in their spare time. Mm-hmm. It is not that kind of thing.
Yeah. I'll hear a lot from the quality guy that has been tasked with this, and he's calling me saying that he's on high blood pressure medicine now, and that he's been having to do. I'm just kidding about that, but working through it for months, and he's just at a loss, and so it's frequent to. I mean, it's natural, to do that, mm-hmm. And you can do that with a lot of things, but this is one of those things you can't.
Yeah, so. The quality guy can, if you give them authority to kind of head up the program mm-hmm. and to draw in help, outside help, inside help.
If you give them a budget.
Budget and some authority, right. Then they can work with everybody. They don't have mm-hmm. to have the authority of a C-level position, but, mm-hmm. They have to have authority to gather people together and say, hey, mm-hmm. we need to work this problem out and make some decisions.
Right.
But yes, it's not a simple, assign this to somebody and let them do it in their spare time. And by the way, you have to get your other job done where we're making money first, which is understandable. They need to, they need to be doing their job that mm-hmm. brings in the bucks. So
you do need a compliance champion or someone with that hat in the business, especially if you have if you're relying on outside or third party providers like us, because you need someone to transfer everything to the internal team at minimum, and then it's always a good idea as a business to have someone check up with. It's as on your providers and make sure things are getting done. So that's just good practice. So I think it is good to put that hat on someone in the business, regardless if you have service providers or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, last one for you, and we'll close her out, is how should subcontractors handle the added responsibility of ensuring that their subcontractors are compliant as well?
That is a good question. So we've had, some discussions over time, and especially here recently, now that all this is really starting to come to fruition. They're like, some of our clients are like, wait, you mean we have to make sure our subcontractors are compliant too? And I'm like, well, it's, yes, and we've let you know that before, and it's one of those things that is mentioned along with everything else, I'm sure, and it just doesn't sink in, But I mean, what they're in the same position as like Lockheed is, for instance. They're the ones that get the original contract, and then it's flowing down to them because they do work for Lockheed and they build a little widget, whatever it may be, or they test a little widget, or they provide some manpower, whatever it might be. But it flows down to them. But guess what? It also needs to flow down to your subcontractors too. So whenever CMMC certification comes out and people have to be certified, it'll start to be a little bit easier because you can ask them if they're certified. But somehow right now you've got to develop a questionnaire to say, hey, just like Lockheed does for you, it doesn't necessarily have to be that in depth, but do you meet these DFARS rules? Are you compliant? And you have to go off what they say, right? But that's really what it is. And if they're not compliant and say they're not going to be, and it's a sad, hard fact of the matter is that you've got to find somebody else, and they need to understand that. Because whatever, and that's assuming that you are that these are subcontractors that are receiving CUI from you that you got from Lockheed or the federal government or Bell or any of the other primes. I'm sorry I singled out Lockheed, but anyway, if you're one of those subcontractors that gets information, a CUI and FCI from a prime, then your subcontractors, if they get any part of that FCI or CUI, then they also have to be. So you have to have some sort of documentation saying that you asked them, and yes, they are compliant. Or whenever the certification comes out, yes, they are certified.
Okay, very cool. Well, I think unless you have anything else to add, I think we're done.
I think we are, and I may have rambled on some of these questions, and I apologize, but I kind of get caught in my own mind going in circles, and but there's lots more topics we could go over, in other podcasts, and I'm sure that we hit on some of those, so we may be going over some of those.
Well, we'll forgive you for it this time. Thank you, guys. We'll be back next week.